time of the year, Andy. There's nothing to talk about.
Well, nothing compared to, I guess, what we have from the end of February through the middle part of April when we got the NCAA tournament and all that, and the Masters and the lead up to the draft and everything. Now, at least when we're talking about playoff baseball, playoff basketball, playoff hockey, and the beginning of the baseball season, which seems to stretch forever.
I think you took me seriously. I was joking.
I know.
I mean,
I just had to throw a comment in there somewhere.
There's so much on our plate, and man, I'll tell you that Nick game, whew, that Mr. Clutch is Mr. Clutch.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, Brunson has made a big difference for that team ever since he came over, and despite some of Thibodeau's questionable coaching decisions over the past few games, the Knicks managed to survive. I think their experience showed last night, and I don't know how they'll fare against Boston, because Boston's a loaded team. They're a deep team. Even when they're banged up, they still have plenty of players. Of course, there's a lot of familiarity between the Knicks and the Celtics, being division rivals, but the Knicks have not had much success against the better teams in the league this year. And so, maybe we'll talk about it a little bit, but I could certainly see this being a 5 or 6 game series at best.
Well, I think if I'm not mistaken, I think the Celtics have beaten the Knicks like 9 straight times or something.
It's something that was like 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 12 or something like that. But I'm still seeing that sports news thing on the screen here.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah,
I guess I'll take that up there and put that up there. Yeah, we should come back up there. I don't know why we're not there.
Maybe you need to stop the loop or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, let's see if I can end that. We'll do that. There we go.
There we go.
Yeah. Now we're back. You were right.
I'm not sure what your background is there.
It
looks like a mascot.
That's a screaming baseball.
Oh, okay.
That's a screaming baseball. So in sports, there are a lot of things going on, of course. Who's the most surprising? The Giants, I guess, would be the most surprising team. Nobody expected them to be, especially in that division. Nobody took them seriously, but they're playing pretty well. And then Baltimore is probably one of the most disappointing teams. Yeah. And we didn't expect Colorado or the White Sox to be any good, and they're not. But Baltimore, we expected them to be pretty good in that division. And, of course, the Yankees are the Yankees, and Judge is having a phenomenal year. Any other
I think you'd have to say, based upon the questionable starting pitching with which they started the season, we knew the acquisition of Soto was going to make a big difference. But the fact that the Mets are right up there with the best record in the league, I think they're now about a half game behind the Dodgers. I think the Dodgers have played maybe one more game or one less game, and I think they have one less loss or something. I think that the Mets are winning 2 out of every 3 games has been very, very impressive, considering, again, who's the quality starter on that team. I really can't think of that. I mean, Peterson has probably put up some very good numbers, but you didn't have, no longer is Jacob deGrom or Zach Wheeler there, where you count on an ace every 5 days or every 5 games. So I'd have to say the Mets are a quasi surprise to the extent that we expected them to play well, but not as well as they are. And I guess at the same point, we'd have to say, at least through right now, the disappointments have been Atlanta and Philadelphia, especially Atlanta.
Yeah, Atlanta. Yeah, definitely Atlanta, Philadelphia. Yeah, you're right. Let me close this. Of course, they would do this when I start talking. When we start talking. You know how that goes.
I guess they are making a case for playing some underdogs today, perhaps in the Major League Baseball, as we start some new series, some new weekend series.
They will. Yeah, exactly. Is there anything outstanding today that you see? We, especially late, since this is, and then of course the weekend. We talk about the series. Who do you expect to do well this weekend?
Well, a couple of teams that have been struggling. I'll be interested to see. One of the more interesting series is Arizona at Philadelphia. Both were expected to be contenders in their respective divisions. Of course, Philadelphia contending for the Eastern Division title, along with Atlanta and the Mets. Arizona effectively expected to contend for second place with San Diego behind the Dodgers. And of course, now we have to add San Francisco into the mix there. So that's an important series. And speaking of the Dodgers in Atlanta, they face each other this weekend in Atlanta. Atlanta started to play a lot better than they were early in the season. Dodgers had a little bit of a slump. They may have turned things around, but let's not make too much out of their offensive explosion against the Marlins the past few days. But the one guy who's going tonight, Friday night, Yamamoto, has been pitching extremely well for the Dodgers all season. And he's one of the guys I'm looking at tonight. One of the things we talk about betting strategies is how to play games based upon the price. And I know you've mentioned it before, Jim, that you don't like to lay more than $1.50 on a favorite when you do play a favorite. And I agree with that. But sometimes you like some of these teams. Like I do like Yamamoto tonight against Holmes of Atlanta. And I think there was one other one that I liked. Oh, yeah, I like the Yankees tonight going up with Fried, who's been outstanding for them in the early going, up against the Tampa Bay team that's really had some difficulties at the plate lately. So what I normally like to do is I either like to play each game individually, laying the 1.5, or put the two teams together in a two-team parlay. So the number I'm looking at right now, and they've changed since then, I believe, but Yamamoto is about $1.65 over Holmes and Atlanta, and Fried is about a 210 favorite over Tampa Bay, and the Pepe of both the Yankees and Atlanta are at home. Now, I don't know exactly what this parlay plays, but I think I've mentioned it before on various shows, and I think even with you and Mark before. If you take two favorites and they're both minus 200, and you put them together in a parlay and they both win as they're expected to do at 2-1, the mathematical percentages say you should win 67% of the time. 2 times you win, 1 time you lose, that's 67%. A 2-1 favorite parlayed with a 2-1 favorite gives a payoff of basically playing a $1.25 underdog. So you're basically converting two favorites that have a high probability of winning into a $1.25 underdog. Now, with this one being 210 and the other minus 165, I'm guessing the payoff is probably closer to between plus 130 and plus 135. So that's often the way from a betting strategy standpoint, that if I like favorites, and I mean, look, you're not going to make money in the long term playing favorite. But when you do play favorites, there are a way to enhance the possible payback, either through playing the run line or doing, I would say, no more than 2-team parlays as far as reducing the overall mathematical expectation.
Well, there's a lot of people out there say never bet parlays, but I think you just gave pretty good advice as to how you can play, prices that are just out of range logically for most people to bet 200 to win 100.
Yeah.
Is in a big, maybe it's a boxing game or, something like that. But when you're talking about a 162 game series and you're talking about prices like that, eventually it's going to kill you. Yeah. But that's an interesting concept you just came up with, to turn two big favorites into a plus price.
Yeah,
that's not a terrible idea.
Yeah, I haven't done the math to compare that play versus playing the individual teams separately, but minus the 1.5 and turning a large favorite very often into a small underdog. Usually the home team will be a better underdog on the run line as a favorite, minus the 1.5, because there's no assurances that they're going to get 9 at-bats. We know that the road team is going to get the 9 at-bats regardless of the score. Of course, the question you have there with run lines is, the way I explain it to people, there's only one way that you don't have an advantage in laying the 1.5, and that's when the favorite wins by exactly 1 run. If you laid the 1.5, now, first of all, if you're laying the 1.5, your price is going to be less than if you played the game straight. So you might turn a minus 165 favorite into a plus 110 underdog. Okay, but you have to win by 2 runs. Now, if you win the game by 2 runs or more, that's your best possible payoff, because you've turned a favorite into an underdog by laying the 1.5. If you lose the game outright and the underdog wins, you lose less, because instead of laying $1.25, you've laid instead of laying $1.65, you've laid $1 to win a plus price. So you lose less. The only time that it backfires on you is when the underdog wins by exactly 1 run. And when you turn it around and you talk about taking the +1.5, the only time you really benefit is if your team loses by exactly 1 run, because you're going to be laying a price to take the +1.5, and the price you're going to be laying is going to be, let's say it's $1.50 underdog. Maybe you're laying $1.20 or something to get the +1.5 or something along those lines, instead of getting plus the 150. So if you lose, you're going to lose more by taking the +1.5 if you lose by 2 or more. If you win the game, you win less, because you're turning a +150 straight underdog into a -120 underdog plus a 1.5. And of course, if the game lands on a 1-run loss, that's the best possible situation. I did a study many times over the years, and I've actually updated it every year, review it. About 1 in every 3 games is decided by 1 run. But keep in mind that very often it's the underdog that loses by the favorite that wins by 1 run. When the favorite wins by 1 run, that's when you lose laying the 1.5. And I think that's about 1/3 of the time that's the favorite wins by exactly 1 run of all games. About 2/3 of all games are decided by 2 runs or more. And of course, the underdog will win some of those games outright. So that's another strategy that I like to compare, laying the 1.5 versus because that's 2 separate bets if you do that in a 2-team heavy favorite parlay.
A few years ago, I was talking to some people, and they would say, well, they'd play the run line minus the 1.5 runs, and they'd also play the favorite on the money line. And I say, why would you do that? And they say, well, you reduce the 1.5 to 1, because let's say you pay $50 at the 160 or 170 minus the 160, 170, $50 on the money line, and then you play the run line as well. So now if they win by 1, you won that bet. But you lose the 1.5. If they win by 2, you win both.
Both, right.
So
that's a similar concept. Yeah.
It's a similar concept. And a lot of people do that. They'll say, well, play the Yankees minus 1.5 and -1 to make it basically -1.
Yeah.
It's another concept in betting. And on the money management issue, that a lot of people say, don't bet teasers, don't bet parlays, et cetera, and they'll talk about first innings and first fives, and there's concepts, and of course the bookmakers make adjustments. If you're going to do that and win, they're going to find ways to offset it by make it more difficult to win. They're not there for giving money away. When we get back to a couple things, a little bit off.
Oh, excuse me. But by the way, one thing, it's always important to, I guess, every few shows or whatever, point out the one advantage that the bookmaker has, let's say in football or whatever, is 11-10, or the 20-cent line in baseball. The one advantage that the bettor has is selectivity. We don't have to play every game. They have to lay every game.
And if you're betting baseball and you're playing a 20-cent line, that's very difficult to beat.
Yeah.
There's a few books that do that, and they're big ones. They know that baseball is difficult for the bookmaker to beat, so they're not going to sit there with the 1 at 110, which is a lot more fair.
Yeah, -105, -105 each way.
Exactly. But when you're dealing with, okay, you're laying 140, taking 120, that's difficult.
That's difficult to overcome. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. How much weight do you put on? I mean, old school handicapping would say ERA, strikeouts, over innings. Yeah. Like guy gets 5 strikeouts in 18 innings in his last 18 innings, and another guy gets 24 strikeouts in his last 18 innings. Well, the guy that's getting 24 strikeouts, he's not having any contact on with those batters. And that does help his overall pitching, because the guys are not doing anything when they don't hit the ball anywhere. Yeah. So I mean, then they throw in the whip, which is walks, hits, and per innings pitch, which is a very important stat. But now you have all the mathematical stuff that's come up, the analytical stuff, and the XFIPs and the things. Do you have a great understanding of all of that? And I mean,
I don't use it. Yeah, I don't use it
maybe
very
someday
much.
we can actually do some deeper research into that to explain it to people.
Yeah, I don't use the FIP and the independent because that involves a number of assumptions that you have to accept as true. You know, fielding range and things like that, which is sort of an artificially determined stat. Even though it's the key thing is though that it is applied consistently across all hitters and all stadiums, things like that. I happen to think that to me the most important factor I use when evaluating, especially starting pitching, although relievers to a certain extent, except you don't know if or when they're going to be used, is the whip, is the walks and hits per innings pitch, because that is, ERA is nice, but sometimes an ERA can be affected by the fact that the starting pitcher puts a couple of guys on base, they pull them, and the reliever is the one who gets hit for the home run, and the ERA counts against the guy who put the runners on base. So that's a little bit misleading. I also one adjustment that I do take a look at is I include earned runs. I call something called total ERA. Yeah, you don't want to penalize the pitcher for the guy who maybe got on base for an error, but everything that happens after that is still part of the pitcher's responsibility. And yet he could give up 5 runs and they're all unearned because there were 2 outs when that error occurred and the inning would have been over. The pitcher's still responsible for the batters that he faces. And sometimes, as I mentioned, that they may put him on base and a reliever will come in and give up the run, and that's a little bit unfair. But with the total ERA, I basically say, okay, what has this pitcher allowed as far as runners to score per inning? It's not a huge difference, but you might find a guy's ERA, the standard way is, let's say, 3.52, and then you factor in all the unearned runs that don't go into that. Maybe the 3.52 goes up to 3.9 or something, which is close to half a run or so difference. But that still pales in comparison to the importance I place on the whip, because I want to know walks and hits per innings pitched. And I'd like to talk about Yamamoto, for example, earlier. The last starts, in fact, I think for the entire year, that's less than one batter per inning, like 0.9 or whatever. And that helps in the use when you're talking about first 5 innings as well, because if you're giving up less than a base runner per inning, it means over the course of those 5 innings that you're going to pitch, you may have to face maybe 1 or 2 guys for the third time.
Yamamoto today. Let's get specifically on a couple games here so we don't run too long. Yamamoto has got an ERA in his last 3 games of 0.50,
Mm-hmm.
and his WHIP is 0.94. Now, that's out of sight stuff. I mean, that's really, really good. I mean, you could look at Holmes for the Mets. He's a 1.12 and a 0.88, which is also very, very good and close to what Yamamoto's doing. Yeah. 2 different games. So I'm not going to get – when you look at
– By the way, excuse me, Jim, for one thing, when you talk about, for example, the last 3 starts or overall, those numbers look nice, but you also want to put them in the context of how many innings have they pitched over those last 3 starts. Some of the starters may have pitched 15 or 16 innings. Other starters may have pitched 21 or 22. So the smaller the size, the more significant each run has in inflating or deflating those numbers. As you get into the season, a guy with an ERA of 2.5, let's say it's the middle of July and he's pitched 125 innings, and his ERA of, let's say, of 2.5, and he gives up 7 runs, that ERA will go up to maybe 2.6. That won't be the case if he gives up 7 runs in a game in the middle of May. That'll be much different.
In the case of Yamamoto, in his last 3 games, he's pitched 18 innings. He's given up. He's struck out 24 in those 18 innings. Mm-hmm. Dodgers are on a 5-game winning streak, and they're going up against Atlanta with Holmes, who's got an ERA over the last 19 innings of 4.74, and the WHIP is 1.05, which is not bad. That's a pretty good WHIP. It's very good. But the mismatch here is, of course, you got a team on a 5-game winning streak at the Dodgers, who are very, very good. We all know that. But you got Atlanta, who has not had a good season. They're going to get better. I mean, they are better talent. They have more talent than that. So what, we have to look. You have to look at the price of the game and see how far out of range it is. But like you said, that's a team that you might want to parlay with another team to get that positive.
Or play the run line. Because you've got a huge edge with Yamamoto as far as the pitching numbers are concerned, and he had a good season last year, his first year with the Dodgers. But also you have a huge advantage with the offense that the Dodgers could provide behind him. And again, on the road, you're going to get that 9 at bats. In fact, I'll take a look as you comment the run line is for Atlanta tonight, for the Dodgers tonight.
Yeah, that's another thing about laying run lines. A lot of times when you're laying a run line with the home team, you may only get 8 at bats.
Yeah,
and that makes it a little bit more difficult to outscore somebody by 2 runs when you're getting 1 less at bat. So that is a concern. You actually, if you like the road team, you're better off with a road team laying the 105 than you are with the home team. Yeah. Although, again, the bookmakers do make adjustments.
In fact, that's exactly it. The Dodgers right now at a lot of books, minus a run and a half, minus 105, versus just to win the game by 1 run or more, minus 165.
Okay. There's any specific game out there that you would like to key on for today to talk about? I mean, we talked about the Arizona. Kelly hasn't pitched this year. I mean, this is well, we have no stats on him. I don't know why.
Yes, he's made a few starts. Don't have the numbers in front of me, but he hasn't been all as effective as we thought he would be. We're starting to see Zach Gallen, for example, who pitched yesterday against the Mets, also struggled early, but he seems to be getting into form. Well, I mentioned Max Fried, he's put up some extraordinary numbers, and that's why the Yankees are now up to minus about 240 to 250 in some places, and even see, there's one where, again, because you're facing a team in Tampa Bay tonight that has not been hitting the baseball really throughout the season. You're laying minus a run and a half, minus 120, as opposed to looking for now, of course, the Yankees may only get the 8 at bats, but their 8 at bats might be much more productive than the 9 at bats that Tampa Bay gets, because the Yankees have one of the better offenses in the league. In fact, if you take a look at, and I don't know where it is today, but you had the Yankees and the Mets right at the top, along with the Cubs, as the greatest run differential through the end of April. In other words, they had been outscoring their opponents by like 52 runs or something like that. So that's it's a shade under 2 runs per game, actually, because they've played about 30 games and you're talking about 52. So I would have confidence in a team like the Yankees, and to a certain extent the Dodgers as well, to be able to put up 2 or more runs than the opposition, especially the Yankees going up against a weak hitting Tampa Bay team and laying minus 120 for that extra run protection.
You have another great pitcher going today, and everybody should remember this guy from last year is Skubal for Detroit. Last 18 innings, he's an ERA of 1.00. His WHIP is 0.89, 24 strikeouts in 18 innings. They're on a 2-game winning streak going up against the Angels with Soriano, who lost 6 in a row.
By the way, Skubal minus 115, laying the run and a half. Minus 185.
It's an absolute must bet for me. I mean, when you look at these, and you got to remember, we're just starting in April. There's been a lot of bad weather. I've considered April this year, for me, very inconsistent results for myself. And usually I do very well starting off, but for some reason it hasn't worked out that way. But I got to keep doing what I do, because over the last 6 or 8 years, it's been very beneficial. But when you look at Skubal and you can look at Fried and you look at Yamamoto and these great pitchers, I think you have to look at that in the context that they're only probably going to pitch 5 or 6 innings. That's the other issue. And then you got to go to the bullpens and look who's available and who's got a decent bullpen. There are some very bad bullpens out there that you don't want to be backing. And that's something that's hit or miss every day, because when a manager uses a really good reliever and he's not going to be available the next day, now you're going in there in the game without one of your weapons. And that adds a lot more work to the equation.
Well, that's why I think you take a look very often when you talk about pitchers who are going to go 5 or 6 innings and then the bullpen comes in. That's why first 5 innings, in some cases first 3 innings, but first 5 innings has become even more important. For example, let's take a look at Skubal. He's like minus 186, minus 185 for the game. He's a little bit less than that for the first 5 innings, but it's also not unusual in lower price favorites where you're actually laying more with the first 5 innings than you are for the full game, because you figure that that huge pitching matchup that you have, the advantage. Let's say Yamamoto. Let me take a look at with Yamamoto, where he is roughly minus 170 for the first 5 innings, and a little bit less than that for the full game. So sometimes you do take into account the fact that when you do a first 5 innings, you're pretty assured, especially with good pitchers, that you're going to get the full 5 innings out of them, and then you turn it over. Of course, at the same time, when you are playing it, you have to hope that that offensive differential that you have in your favor shows up in the first 5 innings, because very often, maybe a team like the Dodgers might put up 1 run against their starter, and then the bullpen for Atlanta comes in, and then all of a sudden they get 5 or 6 runs late. So it's a difficult decision, because you can also lay half a run for the first 5 innings as well, as opposed to the run and a half for the full game.
I think you're probably better off, especially with the inconsistencies. A lot of these bullpens. So, it's basically a tutorial on how to bet baseball. I mean, so are there any underdogs that you see? I think we've pretty much told everybody's, not every game, but we've covered some very strong favorites.
Yeah, I'll tell you an underdog that I like, because you mentioned this team is not playing very well. Waka going up against Kramer for Baltimore. Kansas City's playing well. They just are off a couple of wins, nice wins in Tampa that we were talking about, and they're about $1 plus $1.20 to $1.25 underdog today. In some places, maybe a little bit better, that use a 12-cent line or something. And Kramer's not been pitching all that well. The Orioles 12-18, something like that. Kansas City a little bit over, and Walker's been a solid pitcher going back the last 4 or 5 years. He pitched well when he was with the Mets. He pitched well. I think he was with I know he was with St. Louis for a while, and Kansas City has some decent potential on that team, and I think that we're going to end up seeing Kansas City being one of the contenders to win the American League Central. I
agree. Walker, the last 17 innings. He's got 15 strikeouts. They're on a 3-game winning streak. I'm talking about the Royals. His ERA is 2.65. His WHIP is 1.12. Oh, very, very good.
I usually use anything under 120 is good. 1.2, the WHIP is good. Anything under 1 is excellent.
Kramer, on the other side, 16 innings, his 6.19 ERA, which is not good. His WHIP is 1.47, which is not good either. It's not terrible, but it's not good.
Yeah, I usually use about 1.6. Anything 1.6 or above is terrible, because now you're putting on more than a base runner and a half.
So if we bet Kramer or if we bet Kansas City with Walker today, what price are we getting?
Let me see what I'm showing here across the board, because we're showing Baltimore about $1.35 to $1.40. With Walker, we're getting plus 28, plus 27, plus 25, in that range.
Okay.
And that's reasonable. Team that's playing well.
Right. All right. Well, I think we've covered baseball pretty well today. Anything you want to add before we sign off here?
Well, I know that we're concentrating on the handicapping part, and I'm going to go to something that I talked about on one of the shows I was doing earlier this week about baseball. That isn't necessarily it kind of has a situational relationship to handicapping, and that's that stupid implementation they had during COVID of that ghost runner for extra innings, where you put the runner on second when you start the top of the 10th inning. Well, that immediately gives the road team a huge advantage, because if you go back and you take a look at the numbers, and studies have done this over many, many years, and the results are always the same, is that let's look at it this way. In a normal situation, you double, you got to the first guy up doubles, gets on second base. You now have an expectation of scoring 1 point something runs in that inning. Runner on second and nobody out. Okay, so you're already a favorite to score at least the 1 run with a guy on second, nobody out. Here in this situation, you don't earn that right to be in that favorable position, because you're given the runner on second to start the inning because of the stupid rule change they put in. Now, what that means, and it has a lot to do with strategy as well, okay, it gives the road team an opportunity, since the expectation is they're going to score at least 1 run, they have an opportunity to score 2, 3, 4 runs, okay? So let's say they score 3 runs in the top of the 10th, okay? Well, now you go to the bottom of the 10th. Well, that advantage that the road team had to score multiple runs, yeah, it still exists in the bottom of the 10th with the runner on second and nobody out. but it changes the strategy. The road team now is up by 3. Okay, bottom of the 10th. Let's say what the road team decides to do. Well, you know what? We'll intentionally walk the first batter to put runners on first and second. We can afford both of those runners to score because we've got a 3-run lead. Now, yeah, if the guy hits a home run, the strategy backfires and you're tied. But if you can induce a double play with runners on first and second, all of a sudden you got 2 outs, nobody on, and you're 3 runs ahead. That's an advantage that is huge for the road team as far as strategy goes. Excuse me. What I would like to see, and I understand why they did it, because they don't want to waste too many pitchers or use too many pitchers, and they don't want games to go 17 innings. By the way, I happen to love 17-inning games, but what I think that the change that I would make, the modification that I would make as a compromise, because putting the runner on second, that's not baseball. We all know that. Okay, that's a gimmick. I can be somewhat sympathetic to the reasons for doing it, but here's the compromise. Play innings 10, 11, and 12. The first 3 innings of extra innings, play them like you do the first 9 innings. If the game is still tied after 12, then maybe you can introduce that runner. It still doesn't change the effect that the road team has an advantage, but at least you've got 3 more innings of real baseball to determine a winner in an extra inning game.
What would be the damage of having ties in baseball? We have it in other sports. Why can't we have ties in baseball?
I guess because it's always been that way, which is not a very good defense of it. I mean, look, well, I guess, hockey used to always have ties. And then they went to I think they went first to an overtime and then added the shootout. And what they did was they basically, what you would do in baseball, I guess you could say, is you could count the tie as a half win and half loss. Or you could do what hockey does, and that's you give 2 points for a win, 1 point for a loss. And in an extra inning game, you do the same thing. Both teams get a point like they do in hockey, but the team that ultimately wins the game gets the win. So, for example, if a game goes 12 innings or 10 innings, both teams get 1 point rather, and the team that wins gets that second point. It's a little bit convoluted and maybe a little bit difficult to explain. Maybe you could just count the tie as a half win, half loss.
The one of the issues that they did this, of course, is TV exposure and time used up on the channels and the network time.
And the commercials they get as well from all the extra.
Exactly, but a lot of
action.
people tune it out. Like if you're on the East Coast and a game's going 12, 13 innings, you might be 2 o'clock in the morning before you get to bed. And, and we live in a different situation out here because the games all start so much earlier. But on the East Coast, I mean, they started an 8 o'clock game at night, and now you're going to extra inning. You're 3 o'clock in the morning. You're watching.
Well, that's the reason why a number of years ago they pushed the start time back of Monday night, Thursday night football from, I think it used to be 6 o'clock Pacific, 9 Eastern, and they put it back to like 5:30.
Exactly.
For that very reason.
Money is a big concern with all this. I mean, back when baseball was invented, there was no television, so
right.
That was
and no money.
Exactly. Depression era. But I think we've covered a lot here today. We're going to come back with a little basketball. We'll talk about other things, but let's sign off here, Andy. Good luck this weekend.
Good luck, Jim.
We already
viewers.
I mean, we talked about a lot of games. So you talk about free plays. We gave you a lot of free plays and some free play advice, and then you picked up Kansas City with the Royals. There with Waka as a good underdog play. So we'll talk to all of you again next week on Monday when we do our baseball show and our basketball show. And Andy, we'll talk to you in a few minutes on basketball.
Yeah, we'll wish everybody good luck. Have an enjoyable weekend. And for places where the weather's good, spend some time outdoors. Work on that 9-iron.
Thank you, guys.